Imagine your name echoing across a sold-out Coliseum, and then, in a single headline, it vanishes. What happens when glory turns to exile, when the very shield you bled for wipes you from its memory? Tonight, we uncover the Raiders who were more than tough. They were taboo. From Pro Bowl heroes stripped of their careers to coaches locked out of the league's back rooms, these 10 stories reveal how fast a football empire can close its gates. Stay with me and you'll learn the hidden reasons behind sudden bans, the quiet deals that erased stat lines, and the startling fallout few fans ever see. You'll hear about the Stickum King shunned by rulebooks, the defensive beast whose life spiraled after suspension, and the modern mastermind whose emails sparked an unprecedented erasure. Some fates were sealed by scandal, others by politics, but every tale carries a lesson the NFL would rather you forget. And here's the twist. Half of these names never make highlight reels anymore, yet their legacies still shape today's game. Stick around until the end to discover which forgotten Raider might have changed football history if only the league had let him play. Welcome to History of Raiders. If you crave the untold chapters of silver and black lore, hit that subscribe button and join our quest to remember what others tried to erase. 1. Darrell Russell, the prodigy who fell too fast. Darrell Russell burst into the NFL as the second pick of the 1997 draft. In only his second and third seasons, he stacked 19.5 sacks, bullied double teams, and walked into 2 straight Pro Bowls. At 6'5" and 320 pounds, he ripped past guards like they were practice dummies. Analysts said the Raiders had found the next great interior wrecking ball. Trouble followed success. A failed test in August 2001 cost him 4 games, strike 1. 4 months later, he skipped the league's follow-up screening and earned a 1-year ban, strike 2. While sitting out, he produced another dirty sample which pushed the suspension through 2002, strike 3. Each return carried new hope, and each offseason brought another slip. By the summer of 2004, the count had reached 7 violations, an astonishing record even inside the league office. Commissioner Paul Tagliabue ruled Russell out indefinitely, and rival teams quietly crossed his name off depth chart plans. Russell kept chasing a comeback. He logged 8 games with Washington in 2003, flashed his old burst, then signed a camp deal with Tampa Bay to reunite with Jon Gruden. Another positive test ended that stay before Week 1. 12 months later, the NFL finally lifted his suspension, but no roster spot waited. On December 15, 2005, racing through South Central Los Angeles with former USC teammate Mike Bastianelli, Russell's Pontiac lost control and slammed into a city bus. Both men died minutes after arrival at UCLA Medical Center. The league's once bright star was gone at 29. His career numbers frozen far below their early promise.
Number 2, Rolando McClain. Too young, too soon, too gone. Rolando McClain was supposed to be the next great leader of the Raiders' defense. Drafted 8th overall in the 2010 NFL Draft out of Alabama, he came in with sky-high expectations. At just 20 years old, he had already been the defensive anchor of a national championship team and was seen as the kind of player who could change a franchise. On the field, McClain showed early flashes of brilliance, hard hits, smart reads, and a physical presence in the middle of the defense. But off the field, a different story began to unfold. Just 1 year into his NFL career, legal troubles started to mount. In 2011, he was arrested in his hometown of Decatur, Alabama, on charges related to assault and firing a gun. Though the charges were later dropped or reduced, the headlines left a mark. The following years didn't get much better. He had more run-ins with the law, including another arrest for allegedly resisting arrest and providing a false name to police. The Raiders, already struggling with consistency on defense, found themselves burdened with a player whose presence was becoming more of a distraction than an asset. By 2013, the team had had enough. The Raiders released McClain just 3 seasons after making him a top 10 pick. He briefly signed with the Baltimore Ravens, but abruptly retired shortly afterward, citing a lack of desire to play. He would later attempt a comeback with the Dallas Cowboys, even showing brief signs of the talent that once made him so promising. But suspensions related to substance abuse and personal conduct kept him from ever truly regaining his footing in the league. What began as a career filled with promise turned into a cautionary tale of wasted potential and personal battles that never stayed off the field. Number 3, Malcolm Barnwell. 1,000 yards, then silence. In the early 1980s, Malcolm Barnwell looked like a rising star in the Raiders' offense. Drafted in 1980, the wide receiver brought speed, agility, and sharp route running to the silver and black. Though he wasn't the team's biggest name, he played a key role in creating space for other receivers and keeping defenses on their toes. By the 1982 season, Barnwell had become a consistent target and helped the Raiders remain a dominant force during a critical period in franchise history. His most memorable stretch came in the years surrounding their Super Bowl XVIII victory in 1984. While Barnwell wasn't a headline stealer like Marcus Allen, he was a dependable contributor. He racked up over 1,000 receiving yards during his time with the team, including a strong season in 1983 that helped carry momentum into their championship run. But just as quickly as he rose, his name started disappearing from the roster and the record books. In 1986, Barnwell was arrested for possession of cocaine. At a time when the NFL was tightening its stance on substance abuse, this was a career-ending headline. The league didn't issue a lifetime ban, but the unspoken rule was clear. Once you crossed that line, the doors closed silently behind you. After the arrest, Barnwell was quietly released, and his career faded into the background. No farewell tour, no final game. Just another name lost to a combination of scandal and league silence. His contributions to the Raiders' success became a footnote, his highlight reels collecting dust as if he'd never been part of the team at all.
Number 4, Lester Hayes, the Stickum King the NFL forgot. Lester Hayes was a nightmare for wide receivers. With his crouched stance, laser focus, and uncanny ability to read plays, he dominated the field in the late 1970s and early 80s. But what made him truly unique, what gave him an edge no one could ignore, was a little something called Stickum. Stickum was a gooey adhesive that players used to help catch the ball. Lester didn't just dab it on, he drenched himself in it. His arms, gloves, socks, even parts of his uniform were coated. The ball would almost cling to him. And it worked. In 1980, Hayes had 13 interceptions in a single season. That number remains one of the best in NFL history. His performance helped carry the Raiders to a Super Bowl win, and he was named the NFL Defensive Player of the Year. But in 1981, the NFL cracked down. The league banned Stickum completely. Officially, it was about keeping the game clean. Unofficially, it was because Lester Hayes had become too good. Opponents complained, coaches grumbled, the NFL acted. After the ban, Hayes adjusted and still played at a high level. But something had changed. The magic that made him unstoppable had been taken away. Over time, this Stickum legacy overshadowed his true skill. Despite 5 Pro Bowls and 2 Super Bowl wins, he's never been inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Many believe he was blackballed, not for cheating, but for being too dominant with a tool that was legal at the time. His story remains one of the clearest examples of how greatness can be rewritten, even erased, by a single rule change. Number 5, Jon Gruden, from $100 million savior to vanished name. When Jon Gruden returned to the Raiders in 2018, it felt like the franchise had finally found its spark again. He wasn't just a coach, he was a symbol. The man who had once led the Raiders to playoff battles and energized a gritty fan base was now back with a 10-year, $100 million contract. Expectations were high sky, and the organization treated him like a savior. But just 3 years into his second term, everything came crashing down.
In October 2021, emails surfaced during an unrelated investigation into the Washington football team. What those emails revealed would shake the league. Over several years, Gruden had sent messages filled with racist, misogynistic, and homophobic remarks. He criticized everything from player protests to NFL leadership and used language that was far from professional, let alone acceptable. The emails weren't meant for public eyes, but once leaked, there was no turning back. Within days, Gruden resigned. The man once praised as a genius of the gridiron was suddenly toxic. Not just out of a job, he was stripped from the Raiders' Ring of Honor. The franchise that once embraced him erased almost every trace. The fallout didn't stop with headlines. Gruden filed a lawsuit against the NFL and Commissioner Roger Goodell, claiming that the league intentionally leaked the emails to ruin his career. The case dragged on, drawing even more attention to the question, why only Gruden? And why now? Public opinion was divided. Some believed Gruden had been unfairly targeted in a broader power struggle within the league. Others argued that accountability was long overdue, especially for figures who had benefited for so long from silence and privilege. Gruden, once the face of Raiders' resilience, now lives in a strange limbo, neither welcomed back nor fully gone. His legacy hangs in the balance, shaped not by his playbook, but by words he never expected to be judged. Number 6. Jon Mattac, the wild man lost in the shadows. Jon Mattac wasn't just a Raider. He was a force of nature, a defensive end who embodied the chaos and charisma of the 1970s football. Standing 6'8" and weighing nearly 280 pounds, Twos, as he was called, helped power the Raiders to 2 Super Bowl titles. But while he played with fury on the field, his off-field life was a storm of addiction, partying, and tabloid drama. Mattac became a cultural icon, even acting in films like The Goonies, yet the darker part of his fame caught up to him. Years of substance abuse wrecked his body. In 1989, he died of heart failure at just 38 years old. The league, uncomfortable with his rebellious image and lifestyle, slowly distanced itself from his legacy. Today, despite his achievements, he's rarely honored, mentioned only in passing. A forgotten symbol of a wilder, more unfiltered era of the NFL. Number 7. Todd Marinovich, the Robo-QB who crashed. Todd Marinovich was supposed to be the perfect quarterback. Trained from birth by a strict, obsessed father, he was built for football with military precision. Drafted by the Raiders in 1991, he seemed like the future of the franchise. But behind the scenes, Marinovich struggled with intense pressure and a private battle with drug addiction. His NFL career collapsed within 2 years after multiple arrests and failed drug tests. Once hailed as a genius experiment in athlete development, he became a cautionary tale. Despite moments of brilliance, Marinovich vanished from Raiders history, his name left out of highlight reels and official narratives. He wasn't just released, he was erased. His story remains one of the tragic examples of how the league once turned its back on vulnerable players. Number 8. Barrett Robbins, the vanishing before the bowl. Barrett Robbins was a Pro Bowl center who anchored the Raiders' offensive line during the early 2000s. But just before Super Bowl 37 in 2003, Robbins disappeared. Found later in a manic episode, he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. The Raiders were blindsided. He was suspended, then released after another drug-related arrest. Robbins' mental health struggles were not treated with the compassion they might receive today. At the time, the NFL treated his crisis like a scandal. His Pro Bowl honors and years of service became footnotes. His name was quickly pushed aside in Raiders lore, despite playing a crucial role in their Super Bowl run. His story is a tragic example of how the league once turned its back on vulnerable players. Number 9. Jack Tatum. Feared, then forgotten. Nicknamed the Assassin, Jack Tatum was one of the most feared defensive backs in NFL history. His hits were brutal, legal,
and legendary. But one hit in 1978 changed everything. He delivered a hit that paralyzed Patriots receiver Darryl Stingley, and though it was within the rules, it shook the league. Tatum never apologized, a decision that sparked decades of debate. Though he wasn't banned or suspended, the NFL began to shift away from his aggressive style. Over time, his name was left out of many league promotions and anniversary lists. Despite being a central figure in Raiders history, he became a ghost, admired by fans, but rarely acknowledged by the NFL itself.
10. Ray Guy, the forgotten pioneer. Ray Guy revolutionized the punter position. Drafted in the first round in 1973, a rarity for a punter, he set records and was a cornerstone of the Raiders' special teams for over a decade. But for years, the Hall of Fame ignored him. Many believed the NFL didn't want to enshrine a punter, regardless of impact. It took until 2014 for him to be inducted, long after many of his peers. During those years, his legacy sat in limbo, his highlights absent from tribute reels, his name rarely spoken. Though eventually honored, Guy's near erasure speaks volumes about how even pioneers can be silenced when they don't fit the league's preferred narrative. Raiders versus the Gentleman's Agreement. There was a time in the National Football League when an unspoken agreement silenced an entire race of players. From 1933 to 1946, black athletes were effectively banned from the NFL. There was no official announcement, no policy written in ink, just a quiet decision by team owners, known today as the Gentleman's Agreement. It was one of the most shameful secrets in professional sports history. Before the ban, several black players had made their mark in the league. Stars like Fritz Pollard and Bobby Marshall had played in the early years of the NFL. Pollard wasn't just a running back, he was the league's first black coach, hired in the 1920s. But by 1933, as teams sought to cater to a growing white audience and faced pressure from segregationist influences, all African-American players were gone. They didn't fade, they were erased. For 13 years, the league played without a single black athlete on the field. And while World War II was being fought overseas against fascism and racial ideologies, segregation still held firm in America's most popular sport. The NFL, unlike Major League Baseball, which integrated with Jackie Robinson in 1947, was slow to acknowledge this hidden era. It wasn't until 1946 that black players Kenny Washington and Woody Strode were signed by the Los Angeles Rams under external pressure. Years later, no team challenged these old barriers more directly than the Raiders. Al Davis, the rebellious owner of the Raiders, never played by the NFL's quiet rules. In the 1960s, when much of the league still hesitated to fully embrace racial diversity, Davis not just signed black athletes, he trusted them with leadership. He famously hired Art Shell in 1989 as the NFL's first black head coach in the modern era. But his stance began long before that. Davis openly refused to allow his team to play preseason games in cities where hotels discriminated against black players. He believed talent had no race, and he built rosters that reflected that belief. Davis's moves weren't symbolic, they were strategic, bold, and often controversial within league circles. When others quietly maintained the status quo, Davis shouted over it. In doing so, he built one of the most diverse and dynamic teams of the 1970s and 1980s. The Raiders weren't just feared for their play, they were respected for their principles. Art Shell, once a dominant offensive tackle for the Raiders, embodied that journey. He spent 15 years with the team as a player, became an assistant coach, and then broke a massive barrier when he was named head coach. Shell didn't walk through an open door, he smashed one down. His hiring signaled a shift in the league's image, a sign that change, slow as it was, could come from within. But the irony was clear. The team that most championed integration came from a league that had once excluded black athletes completely. While the NFL eventually honored its African-American pioneers, the gap between Pollard's coaching in the 1920s and Shell's in the 1980s stretched across generations. Lost careers, silenced voices, and invisible stats filled that space. To this day, many fans don't know about the NFL's secret ban. The league rarely speaks of it. Even fewer realize that the Raiders were one of the first franchises to challenge it, not just with words, but with action. Every name we've uncovered so far, every Raider banned, blackballed, or erased, left behind more than just stats and headlines. They left scars on the game, warnings written between the lines of NFL history. And as time moved on, the consequences of their downfalls continued to ripple far beyond the silver and black. Some suffered quietly, their reputations dissolving the moment they walked out of the locker room for the last time. Darrell Russell's tragic decline from Pro Bowler to forgotten figure is a stark example. The NFL's indefinite suspension stripped him of his second chance, and when he died in a car accident just 2 years later, his name barely made the news. For him, the punishment wasn't just about violating league rules, it was about being cast out, without support, into a world that didn't want to remember him.
Others, like Rolando McClain, walked a tighter rope. He wasn't banned by law, but the whispers followed him everywhere. A few off-field incidents, a sense that he couldn't be controlled, and suddenly the doors weren't opening anymore. He tried to return, even rejoined the Cowboys at one point, but his name never recovered its shine. McClain was young, strong, and talented, but in the NFL, being difficult is often a harsher crime than being criminal. Then there are cases like Jon Gruden's,
where the fall was sharp and public. One day he was the head coach of the Raiders, backed by a $100 million contract and one of the most respected minds in football. The next, he was a symbol of the NFL's reckoning with its own image. His leaked emails, filled with offensive language, didn't just force a resignation, they led to him being wiped from the Raiders' Ring of Honor, a place once thought eternal. His legacy, built over decades, evaporated almost overnight. But what about someone like Lester Hayes? He wasn't punished by court or scandal, but by rule changes. When the NFL banned stickum, the adhesive he famously used to dominate as a cornerback, his performance dipped. The NFL rewrote the rule book, and in the process rewrote how fans remembered Hayes. He's not in the Hall of Fame today. Was it because of the glue, or because of how easily the NFL rewrote his narrative?
This pattern repeats again and again. Sometimes the punishment is formal, a suspension, a cut from the roster, a quiet waiver on a Monday morning. Other times, the punishment is cultural. The league decides it's tired of the noise, the drama, the headlines, and suddenly, a player's name just doesn't come up anymore. That's the silent power of reputation in the NFL. It's not always about guilt or innocence, it's about perception. Once a player crosses a line, even if they didn't know it was there, they become a liability. And when you wear silver and black, where rebellion and aggression are part of the brand, the leash can be even shorter. But these stories also expose something deeper: how the NFL controls its legacy. When players are praised, the league lifts them up as icons. When they're inconvenient, it shuts them out. The Raiders, ever the outlaw franchise, have always walked that edge. And the individuals who wore the helmet, they've either been celebrated or erased, with little room in between. Still, for all the lost careers and silenced names, these stories teach something important about second chances. Some players did get another shot. Some reinvented themselves in other leagues or walked away before they could fall. Others faded completely, but fans still remember. In forums, highlight clips, old jerseys, traces of them remain. Even if the league doesn't write them into history, the people who watched them play haven't forgotten. These outcomes are rarely clean. They're messy, emotional, and shaped by forces far beyond football skill. Rules matter, so do politics, media pressure, image, and timing. Whether a player is banned outright or quietly erased, their story always leaves behind a question: What could have been if they were given one more chance or protected instead of punished? And for every erased Raider, there's a cautionary tale hiding behind the shoulder pads. The game is bigger than any one man, but the way it treats those men says everything about the game itself. These 10 stories remind us how fast a career can vanish in the NFL. One moment, you're on top of the world, breaking records, signing contracts, and hearing your name chanted by thousands. The next, you're suspended, benched, or quietly erased from the very game that made you a star. For Raiders players, who already walk a fine line between fierce loyalty and wild controversy, the fall can be even more dramatic. Some were banned for breaking rules. Others were blackballed for being too outspoken, too unpredictable, or just inconvenient for the league's image. And then there are those who were simply forgotten, cut from the roster and cut from history. Yet behind every name lies a deeper truth about the power of perception, the weight of reputation, and the harsh reality of professional sports. These aren't just cautionary tales, they're the missing chapters in NFL history. And now you've heard them. Let me know in the comments, which of these stories shocked you the most? Was there a name you didn't expect to see? If you enjoyed this dive into the untold stories of Raiders legends, give this video a like and subscribe to History of Raiders for more lost chapters, dark turns, and legendary comebacks. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next story, because some legacies never die.